So, in recent news, President Donald Trump has deployed the National Guard into Washington, D.C. under false claims of wanting to clean up crime, despite the fact that statistics show that crime has been down 30% in D.C. over the last number of years. This is all bringing forward the very serious question of, is the U.S. a police state? Is fascism on the rise? Has fascism already been here? What are the implications of federal troops being deployed into numerous cities, even though this has already happened in New York City? And how can we respond? How do we process and think about the fact that our government is zooming towards erasing due process, kidnapping certain kinds of individuals, and refusing to give accurate information about the things that they're doing and the terror that they're deploying in cities? I think back to a lot of what Lucretia McEvil has talked about in the different conversations we've had and what I've seen other Black folks say, which is, if you think that fascism is new or it's here or Trump 2.0 really scares you into silence, people of color, immigrants, undocumented people, trans folks, immunocompromised people, folks of different levels of ability, folks who are neurodivergent, all of these communities and more have already experienced the terror of policing, the terror of state surveillance, and the terror of a police state. I grew up in a really segregated city here in Ohio, where I wasn't allowed to go into certain parts of downtown as a Black teenager. I had to walk through metal detectors to get into school. We had security officers in my high school who would regularly harass students, and that was under the guise of keeping us safe. So when we think about manufactured consent and how fascism and authoritarianism works, we can look at communities that the US has expropriated their violence to and has tested on folks, like Guantanamo Bay, like the Gaza Strip, like so many countless parts of the world where we've done foreign intervention, and we can look at how the imperial boomerang is coming right back towards us. And it's important to talk about. So let's dig into some recent news with what's been happening.
You're not coming in here with no gun.
The firearm is being carried in plain view, therefore it's perfectly legal by California statute. This is public property paid for by the people.
Over my dead body.
Well, that's your call, pig.
In this article titled "Republican States Are Sending Hundreds More National Guard Troops to D.C., this article reads, McAllister has said sending troops to support President Trump in his mission to restore law and order to our nation's capital, and the Guard members would return home if an emergency affected South Carolina. Morrissey said that troops are being sent at request of Trump as a show of regional cooperation. WVNG involvement will include providing mission-essential equipment, specialized training, and approximately 300 to 400 skilled personnel as directed. The new contributions amount to a near doubling of the National Guards in D.C. and a significant escalation of Trump's takeover of policing in the city, which has already been marked by protests and criticisms over his attempts to expand his executive power. So we can see right here, there is a national strategy being built. And I remember talking on my podcast, The Dugout, earlier in the year about the implications of what a Trump 2.0 presidency would be. And with my experience working at the border last year for a couple of weeks and going in and out of border areas and seeing the ways that federal agents and ICE and Border Patrol were able to have special jurisdiction to do specific kind of checkpoints, to stop cars, to ask you if you're a citizen of this country simply based on how you look, and how this carceral logic is expanding into other cities. And there's the coercion and the complacency of Republicans who want to build this out across other states. They want to build out regional cooperation. What do you think an ethno-state looks like? And how do you think different states and politicians will work together to make that happen?
I've lived in a police state, and this is what it's like. It's the catastrophic interruption of daily life. It's the forced mass transports of immigrants.
More than 200 Venezuelan migrants have been deported from the U.S.
It's the growing irrelevance of the law and helplessness of judges and lawyers.
Trump's defiance of that judge was unprecedented.
It's the chilling stories that come by word of mouth.
People heavily armed and claiming to be police in unmarked vehicles.
A state where there's no higher authority than the police. When the police make the laws, enforce the laws, decide who goes to prison, who gets deported, and who stays at home for now.
More protests are expected today over the Trump administration's attempt to deport a pro-Palestinian activist.
Detained and postdoctoral associate at Georgetown.
Pro-Palestinian activist from Columbia University.
Deporting a Tufts University graduate student.
A University of Alabama doctoral student.
I grew up in a police state, and then I was also an adult in Russia that was becoming a police state. So many of the stories are about lists. Russia makes lists of foreign agents, which is basically lists of enemies of the people. When I see that there are these organizations popping up one after another, organizations like Canary Mission, Stop Anti-Semitism, which are maintaining lists, exchanging lists, submitting lists to authorities, advocating for these people to be detained and deported, I am immediately transported back to living in a police state and wondering, am I on the list? So another hallmark of a police state is that they're everywhere. When you hear that ICE is checking people's documents on the subway, that ICE has detained an American citizen, that ICE is outside public libraries in New York City, you really feel surrounded, stalked. Anyone could be a self-appointed enforcer. It can be your neighbor, another parent in your child's school, somebody you see while you're walking your dog. A police state really destroys connections between people by making every connection suspect. The most obvious adaptive strategy, the most human one, is to always look at what is happening to somebody and say, well, this is why it's not going to happen to me. So I'm not an activist, I'm not a student, I'm not a green card holder, I'm not undocumented, but I don't think that should be our logic. And I really, 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 for the record, hate that poem about Nazi Germany, because I should hope that most of my fellow American citizens don't want to live in a police state, even if it's a police state that's not going to be dangerous to them personally. While we're still capable of looking, we have to say what we see, which is that the US has become a secret police state.
Police state, in my mind, is a political system where the government maintains control, not through democratic consent, but through surveillance, coercion, and the threat of force. Instead of protecting rights, the state prioritizes security and order in ways that suppress dissent, limit freedoms, and target specific populations. So even with this, I'm thinking of how social media entities are relying on censorship to not allow certain kinds of content to be spread online. Think about the fact that this past week, or in August 2025, YouTube has instituted a new policy that uses AI to analyze the kinds of content that you watch. And if they deem you as being underage, they can ask for age verification, a selfie, copy, or a photo of your state ID. A lot of talk is out there about the fact that if these companies really care about protecting youth from dangerous content or media that leans them towards a certain kind of violent ideology, then really it wouldn't be to use censorship or to demand more data that can easily be sold or utilized for purposes that can help these companies profit. What do we think is going to happen if the Trump administration subpoenas a company like YouTube? What do we think is going to happen when what you search is able to be tracked and detected and connected to your state and government name, and then used to build a profile of what kinds of people are into more militant action, what kinds of people are against Israel? When we are able to be more anonymous in our digital lives, when we're able to use security culture to our advantage, it allows us to share information, to intake information that is relevant to our movements, and to figure out how to accurately talk about critiques of our government out in the open instead of it being surveyed, weaponized, and used against us. And furthermore, from a leftist perspective, we can look at the ways that a police state doesn't necessarily mean an overt dictatorship. And what I mean by that is that the government isn't going to say, we're a dictatorship, we're creating something like Nazi Germany. They're going to say, actually, we need to go after crime. Actually, we need to go after these certain populations of people that are the problem, are the dilemma, are the otherized subhuman category. And that subhuman category begins to expand. And we can see trial runs of this, whether it's a Democrat in office or Republican in office in the US, during the George Bush administration, opening Guantanamo Bay and detaining people indefinitely, torturing them in brutal ways, and never charging people. During the Obama era, deploying National Guard into various cities where there were protests related to BLM, and telling people that they did not have a right to dissent, even though the state was killing people in their communities. And now with Trump, the creation of Alligator Alcatraz, these experimentations of the past are becoming solidified today in institutional capacities and are being used against more and more kinds of people. I also think how it's important to determine the main qualities that might be detectable. And some of these qualities are, one, mass surveillance and social control. So the state tracks, monitors, and collects information on its population to anticipate and prevent opposition. And this matters because surveillance undermines privacy, chills dissent, and makes people internalize control, which is, in other words, can be seen as self-policing. And so think about the video I did on cringe and the panopticon. Think of the panopticon not on a social level, but on a carceral state and institutional level. Another quality of the police state that we can unpack is the militarized policing and suppression of dissent. So what this means is that police and security forces operate like military units, equipped with heavy weaponry, authoritized use of extreme force, and often treating protests as insurgency. So going into cities, mowing protesters down. My family immigrated to the US from Jamaica, and in Jamaica in the 60s, 70s, 80s, it was hyper common for the government to pay gangs to intimidate or encourage citizens to vote in certain ways, or to simply shoot down crowds of people when it was voting season if a certain kind of political outcome needed to happen and violence was that enacting tool. If the police are more heavily militarized, if they're in your cities on a much regular basis, the capacity for violence becomes that much stronger. And so what this means is instead of serving communities, police enforce state power. Dissent is framed as a threat to national security rather than a democratic right. And we can see examples of this as National Guard being deployed against protesters, fusion centers tracking activists, and the use of counterinsurgency tactics at home, tear gas, armored vehicles, federalized police. And then lastly, this is another topic I've been talking about on this channel, is the erosion of civil liberties and due process. Laws and rights exist on paper, but the state suspends or ignores them. Think about the fact that ICE agents are masking up and covering up their identification labels, despite the fact that in 2020, in certain parts of the country, masking became illegal because it was seen as a way for outside agitators to hide their identity when they were participating in protests.
I don't know why we're pretending this is complicated. ICE wears masks because we saw what happened at Nuremberg when the Gestapo didn't. That's it.
Anonymous federal troops coming into cities, refusing to identify themselves, kidnapping people, there being no tracking or ability to really know where people are going. And there's no ability to advocate for someone who has been unjustly arrested by a state that is doing illegal shit in order to kidnap who they perceive to be criminals or terrorists. So these laws exist on paper, but the state suspends or ignores them, especially for marginalized groups. Detention without trial, deportations without hearings, or constant states of emergency to normalize exceptions to the rule of law. Think about the clause that President Trump was able to use to send federal troops into DC. And to break this down even further, we should think about a police state through a variety of definitions by thinkers that have really dove into this work in the past, like Angela Davis, like Ruth Wilson Gilmore. And so first, we can think about the police state as racial capitalism. In this view, the police state isn't an aberration, it's a structural mechanism used to uphold racial capitalism. Policing and incarceration serve to contain surplus populations marginalized by the economic system. And key abolitionist thinker, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who has stood 10 toes down in the abolitionist movement for decades. And Ruth Wilson Gilmore writes, prison is not just a response to a free-floating thing called crime. It's a response to surplus populations. Prisons are designed to absorb people, those people who have been abandoned by the state, is what Ruth Wilson Gilmore said in Document Journal. Further, prisons are partial geographic solutions to political economic crises organized by the state, which is itself in crisis. Mentioning surplus populations is so sharp and chilling and necessary right now, because if we think about the rise of eco-fascism and the rise of eugenics, i.e. American Eagle, Sidney McSweeney's ad, the Trump administration basically saying that certain kinds of people are inherently dirty, uncivilized, that Haitians eat cats and dogs, spreading rumors around places like Springfield, Ohio. If we think about the creation of surplus populations, people that don't need to exist in order for the elite to have the luxuries and power and pure misery that they want to attain, the first step in having state control is determining who the surplus population is. And if we look at the US, the surplus populations right now, allegedly criminals who have come to this country to commit murder and rape, it's allegedly undocumented folks who are on welfare or are using tax dollars. We also know how history works. You choose a criminalized other, and that criminalized other begins to spread, and spread. So it goes from undocumented immigrants and criminals and rapists and murderers, even though we can still look at President Trump and the Trump administration and look at how many murderers and rapists are there. And it spreads into anyone who speaks out against Trump. It spreads to anyone that goes to a protest and can have their face scanned and have a profile made of them that is sent to the FBI or the CIA. It spreads to your mother, father, friend, cousin, teacher, professor, journalist. We can think of the police state as an establishment of a permanent state of emergency. So in this framework, we can see the police state as a regime that suspends the rule of law for specific populations, maintaining control through a perpetual state of exception. Angela Davis argues that the prison has become a black hole in which the detritus of contemporary capitalism is deposited. In her book, Are Prisons Obsolete?, she makes a really amazing. Prisons operate as an invisibilizing force.
Men are deliberating the fate of the Black Panther leader on the 8th floor of that building. It is their job to decide whether he is guilty of killing Oakland policeman John Fry and wounding Officer Herbert Haynes in a pre-dawn shootout last October 28th. 2 floors above the jury in his cell, Huey Newton, who has made almost no show of emotion during the 8 weeks of trial, calmly awaits the decision of the jury. I talked to Newton in the jail.
As far as the proceedings thus far, that the courts have only reflected the racist attitude of the general power structure, that I haven't received a fair trial, that I should not have been indicted in the first place. I was indicted by a blue ribbon grand jury, a middle-class white grand jury that did not represent a cross-section of the community. And
You say you don't feel you've had a fair trial?
No.
Why?
Number one, that the judge has been very racist throughout the proceeding, very pro-prosecution, that I don't feel that I should have been tried at all. And if I had been tried, if there was an inkling of reason to try me, I should not have been tried for first-degree murder. That if the judge had not been a racist, that he would have amended the charges to a manslaughter, perhaps. The very fact that he didn't dismiss the whole charge
only
reflects his
our
racism.
prisons and institutions of jailing, they literally disappear people for a number of years. They expose these people to various forms of psychological and physical torture. But these prisons exist in places that are rural, that use the economic collapse of certain kinds of communities to promise jobs, to be in areas where it literally takes people much longer time to travel there physically to visit their family members. And then you build in these systems of surveillance and communication that allow corporations to profit off of the invisibilized nature of prisons and jails. The mass incarceration of the US has trained this country generation after generation after generation to be used to the invisibilized nature of prisons and jails. I mean, I remember in high school, going to visit my stepfather in prison was a whole process. We had to drive to the town that his jail was in. We had to pay for gas once or twice a month. I mean, it was like a whole process. It's like you're not going to church, you're going to prison. So you dress up, you need the money for gas, you need the snacks, and you go there, you go to this really fucking dark structure with all this metal and gates and wires. You're passing through all of these cameras, and you're entering a space of invisibilization. Prisons operate to be a solution to the vast array of social and political issues that the state should be remedying and helping people work through. And it's creating a reality where if you're not a part of the regime, you can easily be picked off or disappeared. That's the reality that we're facing.
Y'all, did you catch the switch? Did you catch it? A few days ago, Donald Trump was talking about we're going to get the homeless off the streets of Washington, D.C. And now I'm not going to say only, they're mostly targeting black boys and men. They are going to them. They're going to them in daylight. They're not going out there past curfew. They're going there in daylight, and they have imported the Rudy Giuliani special, stop and frisk. You black, you were suspicious, empty your pockets. Let's see what you got. These are reminiscent of the Jim Crow laws or the past laws in South Africa. Why are you standing here? And what right do you have to be here? And prove to me that you have not committed a crime or you are not a walking crime. That's what they're doing. He's got the DA, the FBI, Homeland Security, ICE, DC Metro Police. He's got National Guard, and he's got military, all for a few neighborhoods. The black community in the neighborhood that he has designated a trouble zone or wherever he calls it, is being occupied right now. Where are those protesters supporting Gaza and Palestine, mad about the Israeli occupation 7,000 miles away? You got one happening right here. Where are those 2A people? You bought 3 million, 100 million guns, whatever it is, because you were preparing for government tyranny. Where are you now? Where's the NRA? Where are all you 2A people? So look, if you are in DC, remember, be careful, right? Especially if you're a black male, be careful. And look, it's not just black males in jeans and t-shirts. If you are in a suit and tie and you are even the federal government, if you are off-duty cop, you will still get it because it's not what you're wearing, it's the skin that you have. They're going to come after you. And white supremacy is never satisfied nor satiated. That's why he's already said he's coming for Chicago. He's already come for LA. He's coming for New York. He's coming for Oakland. And you know what else? That means Atlanta. That means Philly. That means wherever. That means Portland and Seattle, because he hates y'all anyway, even though most of y'all up there white. He hates y'all. You guys got next. So you better prepare yourselves. And look, it can't just be Gavin Newsom out there fighting back as a Democrat. It's got to be all these other governors. I know a few others are doing it, but it's got to be more. You got to have more. You can't just have this guy with his personal King's Guard and his personal thugs and goons terrorizing one community to start, because that's the fascist playbook. You start with one and you spread to others. I remember he said homeless, but now he's after everybody else who's black.
And we can see this. There's one specific example that I want to note out of DC. An activist known as Afeni was arrested on Friday, August 15th in DC. They were arrested, pepper sprayed, and slammed to the ground by Metropolitan Police for protecting youth at Navy Yard Metro Station over alleged fare evasion. Afeni worked to ensure that the youth knew their lawful rights as they traveled. On Saturday, August 16th, she was released. Public transportation about modes of movement being so heavily policed, about certain kinds of bodies or individuals being inherently criminalized. Why the fuck did I hate taking the bus in Cleveland growing up? Why the fuck did I hate taking the subway system in New York when you'd go into your local subway and you'd see a cop and you'd be like, oh fuck, I gotta go around the other way and find another turnstile to get in through. Black people, poor people have already existed under the ramifications of a police state. And the fact that this is an example of federal troops going into DC, people being more hyper-vigilant, and a community member looking out for other people in their city and trying to step in, trying to let them know their rights. And the fact that this person was brutalized and arrested. And I was talking to my podcast co-host, and you can see in the video where Afeni is arrested and they're pepper sprayed and they can't see. And as they're being walked away by cops, they're talking to someone who's recording, and they're talking about this fascist takeover of DC. And the cop next to them smiles, and you can kind of see that they're being like, oh, we're not fascists. Like, what are you talking about? We're just doing our job. What do you think Nazis were doing? They were just doing their fucking job. They didn't want to have to worry about being called out or censored or sent to the death camps as well. So it's better for you to protect your own longevity while you're becoming the oppressor for someone else, while you're being paid to brutalize people, while you're being paid to use pain compliance, and while you're subjugating people and normalizing surveillance on a scale, a level of surveillance that certain kinds of bodies in the US only think one of the assumed kind of logics of surveillance is that if there's a particular criminal in an area and there's 500 people, surveillance, the manufactured consent that the state uses will survey all of those 500 people and use that surveillance to further criminalize people, to further normalize the panopticon, and to have citizens be used to having their privacy scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed away. And I do think it's telling that this is during a time we're seeing more censorship online, where we're seeing more public media entities that have progressive ideals or centrist ideals or ideals that want to acknowledge diversity being scrubbed away and their funding being rescinded, the targeting of universities and their funding. All of this, alongside the fact that federal troops are being deployed into cities, is in the fascist playbook.
TikTok's new community guidelines make me want to actually throw up. Like, I don't think people realize just how much everything is about to change in 27 days. You think your content is being suppressed now. Oh, girl. Before we even get to the content changes, let's go ahead and look at the community principles section first, because that underlines everything else. In rare and exceptional situations, such as crises or moments of social unrest, we may adjust our usual enforcement or rules to protect our community and address emerging harms. Yeah, it's basically a censorship kill switch. So during protests, strikes, elections, or any situation that TikTok deems as a crisis, the rules could change instantly and you would have no idea. Moving right along to the shocking and graphic content section, this is where they start getting kind of tricky because according to the new community guidelines, they're going to start restricting content that shows the build up to serious injury or accident, even if the injury itself is not shown. And this targets the exact kind of footage that we need most. You know, like when officers draw weapons on peaceful protesters or ICE agents attack people on the street and kidnap them while they beg for their lives. Like, all of that is going to get removed before this impending violence even happens. So you'll never see how these situations actually developed or who started the confrontation or if it even turned violent. Another fun one in shocking and graphic content is this little ditty which states that graphic incidents during war or natural disasters now gets both age restricted and buried from your For You feed. In the current guidelines, this kind of content was just age restricted, but now it gets hit with a little double whammy. This applies to, I don't know, like a forced famine in Gaza, war crimes, same with the Ukraine, or natural disasters, or any real-time documentation of global atrocities basically now gets hit with a 2-time penalty. This next one really pisses me off, okay? So in the misinformation section is one of the most insidious changes. It says that content that poses an elevated risk of undermining the integrity of the information ecosystem or eroding trust in institutions, organizations, or businesses is going to get suppressed. Businesses. Fuck my drag. That's my whole thing. My whole page is about exposing how these tech companies abuse user data, roll out predatory terms of services under people's noses, and collaborate with government surveillance and the DoD. Like, if you ever doubted that tech corporations were running our country, then let it be known. Oh, and you guys are going to love this one. So also under misinformation, there are 2 additional pieces of content that will not be eligible for the FYF page. One of which is sharing unedited media that is presented out of context and may mislead a person about a topic of public importance. For example, showing a crowd at a music concert and falsely calling it a political protest. Huh. What a random example to use. In addition to that, unverified claims about a crisis or a major civic event also will not be eligible for the FYF, which this is major because before it did not include major civic events. I feel like basically what this is going to do is just suppress a bunch of stories that give institutions enough time to shape the narratives by the time we hear about it. But don't worry, because while they're silencing independent journalists, the civic and election integrity section has carved out exceptions for state power. The old policy took a very hard stance in that they did not allow any political advertising, period. No ads from politicians, political parties, campaigns, PACs, advocacy groups, nothing like that. In the new guidelines, the policy states that government and intergovernmental entities are eligible to advertise on TikTok as long as they're certified to work with TikTok's internal team. So grassroots organizers or new political voices are going to have to promote their content organically, but state institutions can just flood your feed with messaging that's designed to look neutral. You know, heading into the midterms, I think that this creates a massive information imbalance, and I'm very, very worried about that. And I'm already starting to see some of this stuff happen and take shape. Like, I don't know about anyone else, but I'm restricted to a maximum of 4 hashtags per post. I don't even do that many hashtags, but they keep dropping the number from 5 to 4. I'm sure it'll be 3 by next week. Or how about the fact that I had a friend from New Zealand message me privately and criticize the government's handling of a political arrest? The platform not only flagged her message as graphic content, but it also suggested that I block her immediately afterwards. It's conditioning us to see political dissent as dangerous, and we cannot let that happen. In terms of what we do about it, I mean, I think start by following all of your favorite independent journalists on all of their other platforms like Patreon, YouTube, Substacks, whatever they're on. We have to stay united. These changes are meant to fragment us, especially as we head into midterms. Our voices together are so effective. Keep the comment sections loud no matter where you go. We must maintain this alliance we've created with one another. Okay, and in the meantime, I guess just share this kind of information with as many people as possible so that everyone can prepare for what we're about to head into.
Earlier this year, Trump selected a company to design the $175 billion Golden Dome, which is based off of the Iron Dome that Israel has built, which is an extremely complex missile defense system. Are there reports out there talking about how logistically it's going to cost way more money than $170 billion? Are there also reports about the fact that this is increasing the nuclear arms race and creating a reality where the US wants to use more militaristic force, both domestically and internationally, in a way that has been unforeseen? And this article right here says, Trump told White House press conference that the US Space Force General Michael Goulteen would be the lead program manager for an effort widely viewed as the keystone to Trump's military planning. Golden Dome will protect our homeland, Trump said, adding that Canada has said it wanted to be a part of it. In a statement, the Office of Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said that he and his ministers were discussing a new security and economic relationship with their American counterparts. These discussions naturally include strengthening NORAD and related initiatives such as the Golden Dome, it added. The program, first ordered by Trump in January, aims to create a network of satellites, perhaps numbering in the hundreds, to detect, track, and potentially intercept incoming missiles. The guise of surveillance, the guise of defense being used to the tune of almost $200 billion to build this fucking dome. And this is on top of the funding that the Big Beautiful Bill has promised towards ICE and Border Patrol over the next number of years, which is tens of billions of dollars. And when I read the constant updates, the constant promising of money to these war and weaponry companies and profiteers off of death and misery, it really lets you understand the sheer lack of humanity of the elite, the sheer glee that they will have in watching as people experience terror, as families are ripped apart in countless cities. And the fact that a lot of these people that work for these companies, that work in the government, that are in the Trump administration, Trump himself, these people are pedophiles. They're murderers. They advocate for the subjugation of other human beings while demonizing queer people, while demonizing trans people, while stripping away the educational resources of young people and beyond. So who is the actual criminal here? And who should be surveyed? And why? And if the elite can make decisions that control, destroy, and disrupt the lives of millions, if not billions of people, where is the accountability for them? And are we not their accountability?
Just like that old Uncle Tom back during slavery time, tried to teach you and I.
They want to double ICE detention capacity to 107,000 beds, which is equivalent to detaining the entire population of Fresno, California, or nearly a third of all residents in Chicago. Hiring 10,000 new ICE agents is roughly the same as employing the entire New York Police Department, all focused on immigration enforcement. Over the past month, I was away at this art residency, and one of the artists there is from California, and they were talking about how so many people of color in their community have become so immediately incentivized to potentially become ICE agents because there is the large bonus you get, and you're also promised public loan forgiveness, which is being scrubbed away for regular-ass people. What does it mean a violence worker employed by the state is incentivized with bonuses to come into this field or job at a time when people are being disappeared, being paid to kidnap and disappear people? My worry is that more military and federal troops and militarized police are going to be instituted in cities around the country, and they're going to be strategically placed in neighborhoods during midterm elections. They're going to be strategically placed by cities, by institutions and community pillars that are essential for social life. And the ability to go outside, the ability for free movement, the ability to move throughout your city without being surveyed by drones, without having your image or your activity or your movement being translated into a fusion center. That reality is going to become much more commonplace. And when I think about the amount of military infrastructure and surveillance at the border is going to expand into every city and locality in the US. You want to go downtown? Be prepared to have to go through a checkpoint. You want to go to church? Be prepared to have federal troops down the block, making sure that people going to the local mosque are citizens. And be prepared to deal with the harassment that Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities have dealt with for years and years. In the city that I live in now, there was a term for a special unit of the Columbus Division of Police called the Jump Out Boys, who would show up in neighborhoods in poor Black and Brown communities and jump out and kidnap people, use trumped up charges. This was documented for years and years and years, to the point that a number of years ago, the Jump Out Boys were disbanded, really caring about situational awareness. And this was something that I brought up in my security culture video. But how are we going to be prepared to leave our home and to look for unmarked vehicles in our neighborhood? How are we going to be prepared to know the different kinds of federal vehicles or the different things that ICE agents or federal agents might wear?
Hello everyone, welcome to a very special video. This one has been very highly requested due to the amount of calls and texts that hotlines across Southern California have been receiving. This is a video about how to identify ICE vehicles and how to tell if it is an ICE vehicle and an undercover vehicle and not just the police. So let us begin. Usually the dead giveaway is they have very tinted windows and they also have lights in their cars. The second dead giveaway is there are no license plates. Now, don't get it confused. There seems to be a trend with people not choosing to put their license plate in the front of their vehicles for some reason. And then very common vehicles that ICE agents will use is a Ford, a Chevrolet, a Dodge, a GMC, and Chevy Tahoes. How do you identify vehicles that ICE agents are using to raid and lightning strike our communities? Number one, they have no plates. People tend to be stopped for having no plates. So if a vehicle has completely tinted windows and no plates, that tends to be a massive red flag that is potentially an ICE agent. Now, number two, they use paper plates. Now, use your discretion on that one. Don't go assuming that the old lady going to the grocery store or going to the Superior is an ICE agent. Use your discretion. Don't assume everybody who has paper plates is suddenly an ICE agent. Number three, license plates from other countries. If you see a car who has a license plate from Mexico, like that has happened before, that is also a very dead giveaway that is an ICE agent. If they have paper plates from some foreign land, you can't be using that if you're in the United States without being stopped. And fourth, the windows are completely tinted, as I mentioned earlier. If the car is completely tinted, it is all one uniform color, that tends to be a massive red flag as well. And I'll also be making a video about other federal law enforcement agencies that are assisting ICE in immigration raids, because that is a whole separate video with a long list of different things to look out for, so stay tuned for that one.
This is why there's been major conversations around bolstering the organizing related to ICE watches and following ICE. I think about the different direct actions that people have deployed even so far. If someone is acting like a fascist, you treat them like a fascist. You go there where they go and you make it difficult for them to do anything. That is the anti-racist skinhead logic that I think people need to really, really be aware of, Don't let them into your parties. Don't let them into your neighborhoods. Don't let them into your cities. But if you have undocumented people in your life, in your community, in your family, at your workplace, be prepared to have lines of communication that can allow you or other people to protect each other. If you show up to work and there's ICE agents at your job and you know that one of your coworkers is undocumented and they're working a shift that day, how are you and your coworkers or your bosses going to institute a process that lets people know this is our system for letting people know if this is happening? This is the code word that we're going to utilize in this group chat. So if this is sent, you know right away, ICE is in the neighborhood. And if you are of a status where it can be dangerous for you or they can kidnap you, understand this clearly. I think this is going to be so necessary. You or someone else you know is detained. What is the process? Is there a fund that can be allocated or raised for in the community that can pay for legal fees and to pay whatever comes up? How are people going to be contacted? Can a team be built out on a community level to look out for people if or when they're detained. Ultimately, I think it's a question of what are we prepared to do to defend each other? Because I think about Huey P. Newton's revolutionary suicide and how what he speaks to and writes about isn't this vagrant running into the line of fire and the front lines and trying to be the most machismo revolutionary, but it's a question about establishing a very clear human dignity and respect for yourself and for other people, and to understand that under racial capitalism, under imperialism, under fascism, under a police state, to have dignity is to be willing to defend yourself, is to oppose the forces of the state and beyond that are threat actors that want to dehumanize people. Under this system is to say, I'm going to defend myself and others no matter who the oppressor is, no matter who the enemy is that against us. And we can look at Afeni in DC and see that as a clear example. If ICE or federal troops or anyone is harassing someone in your local community and you have the capacity to step in to instruct people of their legal rights, to document, use your privilege, use your knowledge to your advantage, and be prepared to step in. And ideally, you have built out a community system, a way of caring for each other, that when you are detained or when you're targeted by the state, there are going to be people waiting for you when you get out. When your bail is posted, there are going to be people checking in with you and giving you the social, emotional, and political resources that you need to continue the long work of building community that can help us all. I just really think it's so important to remind us that we deserve to have dignity, that people deserve to live without fear. As a child of immigrants, it's endlessly chilling for all of these things to be happening. It makes me want to commit more and more to my beliefs. It makes me want to commit more and more to figuring out ways that I can get involved locally. It makes me want to commit more and more to how I can build out my own personal practice of community, personal, and self-defense. These are considerations and questions that we should all be having. We shouldn't be shocked into silence. We shouldn't be fearful of speaking truth to power. And it should be the government and the state that is afraid. I think it's always been a police state. I think the US has always been a police state. We have literally created and innovated policing and carcerality. If any of you have read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, it's an amazing piece of study to look at how the ending of chattel slavery fed into segregation, that the Black codes and slave codes that surveyed enslaved Africans when they were moving from one plantation to another with the instruction of their slave master, that these Black codes and slave codes allowed any kind of white person to stop, ask for papers from an enslaved Black person, and demand that they show that they have the authority to move wherever they wish to go. This turned into Jim Crow, segregation, the Three-Fifths Compromise, the refusal to acknowledge Blackness as human, as a citizen, as having the right to vote or having accurate political representation. When we think about Jim Crow, segregation, vagrancy laws, loitering laws, these are laws created by the US government and the state to target individuals for simply existing in public. And if we understand the connection between the US policing and Palestine and the surveillance of Palestinians, the checkpoints that they have to go through, the constant amount of surveillance that they are subjected to, the lack of due process, the indefinite detainment, we can see connections between Palestinian life and Blackness and the existence of a police state that is global, imperialistic, and is here to stay. It's an epigenetic continuation of whiteness, white supremacy, and imperialism. And in the ways that Black people had to free themselves from their slave masters, had to be maroons, had to break the laws to demand their humanity, had to be brutalized, had to be willing to be brutalized through the tactics of nonviolent resistance, through building mutual aid structures, survival programs, being targeted by the state, we can see again and again how we're exactly where we've always fucking been. And what is so maddening to me is that I look at my childhood I look at growing up and homophobia being so much more institutionalized. I look at xenophobia being so much more institutionalized. I think of I think of the establishment of the Department of Homeland Security. I think of all of the illusions and lies that a Democratic Party or Republican Party has ever promised anyone in this fucking country, and how it always leads to brutality. And what we're seeing now is the past coming back to live again, make America great again. That did not just come from Trump, it came from Reagan. And if we think about Trump as a man who has a decades long history of racism, of spreading propaganda and disinformation about the Central Park Five, who were proven and known by many to be innocent. What does it mean to have a white man who is a leader, who has been wealthy all of his life, who has been protected by lawyers and Republicans and loyalists and people that are willing to lean into populism, people that are willing to lean into eugenics, someone that is paid to criminalize Black people in the past? Now you're in the position of being the most important world leader. So we can only assume that the governors, the politicians that are aligning with Trump, that are helping him now, are setting the same plans in motion for their localities. And to resist what is happening, we have to tap into the histories of resistance that Black people, Indigenous people, poor people, marginalized people have exhibited again and again. A refusal to allow your oppressor to dehumanize you. Finding a spiritual practice that compels you to believe in and to actualize your humanity second by second. The ability to understand that in order to really believe in the legibility of a nonviolent strategy, as Stokely Carmichael says, you have to believe that your enemy has a conscience. Do you believe that this state has a conscience? Do you believe that Donald Trump has a conscience? D.A.D. Vance, Peter Thiel, all of these fuckers in office. What else do we expect? Thank you for watching another video on this channel. I think I like recording these little audio outros when I'm done editing because they help me really tap into what I was trying to process making this video. Sometimes when I see the news, it actually fucking terrifies me and I get really angry, and then my mind goes on this hamster wheel of what can I make think right that can help me process, that can situate these big questions in my mind in ways that are tangible. And for me, the idea that we all should confront, understand, and be prepared to face the shamelessness of the police state as it's expressing itself now, and to understand that this is tied to history, that this is built on the backs of indigenous genocide and transatlantic slavery and xenophobia and all of these social instances and horrors that we bared witness to, even just within our lifetimes, has been leading us to this moment and beyond. And I think taking the time to redefine and understand these things for myself and to express it in this form is something that really helps ground me. And I hope this maybe does a little bit of that for you. Check out the resources in the description and talk to your community, talk to your friends, talk to your family members, like ask people how they're feeling. Try to set intentions around how you want to communicate with each other if or when the police, the military, ICE, DHS, FBI, if any of that shit comes into your city or neighborhood, what are you going to do? Start to have those conversations. Till next time.